What is the problem? I have a valid ticket.
Sir, your behavior is unacceptable. You will not be boarding this flight.
I never thought there would come a day when I, the man who owns nearly a quarter of Horizon Airlines, would have to put on the plainest clothes I owned, drag a simple carry-on, and board one of my own company's flights like just another anonymous traveler. I left the tailored suit in my closet. I left the Rolex on my desk. I wore a black t-shirt, faded jeans, and sneakers so ordinary they could belong to anyone. This wasn't about disguise. It was about truth. For months, complaints had piled up, letters, emails, online reviews, all echoing the same theme. That Horizon staff treated passengers differently based on how they looked. Not race outright, not always words you could put in a lawsuit, but appearance, clothing, vibe. The image of who belonged in first class. I wanted to see if those whispers were real. So I bought a ticket. First class, seat 2A. Paid in full, under my real name, no favors. I wanted to be seen as a man, not a title. And as I walked through the jet bridge, I could feel eyes sliding over me, quick and judgmental. It wasn't a welcome. It was a calculation, a silent verdict before I even reached my seat. I've felt that look before. When I was younger, job hunting, carrying nothing but ambition and a degree, I was told I didn't fit the image of the airline. That phrase had burned into me for decades. And here it was again, recycled, unspoken but alive in their eyes. When I reached 2A, the seat I had paid for, the seat that was mine, the flight attendant blocked me with her body. Her expression was flat, almost bored, as though I was a child wandering where I didn't belong. "Sir, I think you're in the wrong cabin," she said. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a simple mistake. I handed over my boarding pass, steady, certain, my name, my seat number, all in order. But she didn't even look. Not really. Her eyes went past the paper and landed back on me, my jeans, my t-shirt, and I felt the invisible weight of her judgment press down on me like a verdict. "This seat's been reassigned," she added quickly, already gesturing toward the economy cabin as if the matter was settled. I tried again, calmly, my voice steady. "No, this is my seat. It says 2A. I showed her my ID, too, hoping the formality would force her to acknowledge reality. But she barely flicked her eyes over it, then dropped it back like it was worthless. In that moment, a heavy helplessness settled in my chest. I have sat across from billion-dollar investors. I have closed deals that reshaped entire markets. I have commanded boardrooms with nothing but words. And yet here, in front of a single flight attendant, I was invisible, stripped of authority, reduced to a man in jeans who apparently did not belong. I wanted to believe she was mistaken, that this was just one employee having a bad day. But the way she smirked, the way another crew member chuckled behind her shoulder, told me this wasn't new. This was a pattern. This was a culture. And all the power I carried outside that cabin meant nothing when, inside, they had already decided I was no one. I stood there, holding a ticket that should have guaranteed me dignity, and felt it slip away in their dismissive glances. Every complaint I had read in emails, every desperate story from passengers who said they were treated like frauds or intruders, suddenly lived in me. I was no longer the CEO investigating rumors. I was just another man being told he didn't belong. And in that moment, I wasn't angry. I wasn't defiant. I was helpless. Because all the evidence in the world, the boarding pass, the scanned code, the plastic license in my wallet, meant nothing to people who had already decided what I was worth the second they looked at me. The moment she tore my boarding pass in half, something inside me snapped. I had walked onto that plane prepared to be calm, prepared to observe, to see the truth for myself. But as the pieces of that ticket, my proof, my right, fell like trash to the carpeted floor, I felt heat rise in my chest, thick and uncontainable. That seat was mine. Seat 2A. I paid for it. I held the confirmation. I showed my ID. Yet all of it meant nothing to her. Nothing. She didn't see me as a customer. She didn't even see me as a man. To her, I was an intruder, someone to be pushed back, hidden, erased. And when she ripped that ticket, she wasn't just tearing paper. She was tearing away dignity, stripping me of something I had earned. I clenched my fists, not because I wanted to lash out, but because I needed to hold myself back. The anger burned sharp, pushing against my ribs, begging to explode. Every chuckle from the smug attendant behind her, every dismissive flick of the captain's eyes only fueled the fire. They looked at me as if I were a liar, as if I had forged my way into this cabin, as if men like me couldn't possibly sit in first class without a trick. I could feel the tension pressing in from all sides. The passengers were watching, some in silence, some whispering, some lifting their phones. I caught one woman mutter, "This is discrimination." And she was right. It was. Every second of it. But the crew? They doubled down. The captain's voice cut through the air, cold and stern. "Sir, if you don't comply, we'll remove you. We have VIP guests who need that seat." That word, VIP, stabbed me. So, my money wasn't enough? My valid ticket wasn't enough? Dressed differently, I no longer qualified as a very important person? The fury in me boiled higher. My jaw ached from holding back words I wanted to unleash. For years, I had fought against this exact mentality, the quiet, poisonous belief that worth is measured by image. And now here it was, alive in my own company, humiliating me in front of strangers. They didn't even try to hide it. The wealthy couple behind the captain stepped forward, smiling like royalty, waiting to claim the seat I had purchased. Champagne flutes in hand, their smirks twisted the knife. I could almost hear the unspoken line. "This is our world. You don't belong in it." 7S, I wanted to roar, to tear the smugness from their faces with the truth of who I was. But I held it in, teeth grinding, because I knew anger would only feed their narrative. Still, my silence wasn't surrender. It was pressure, coiled tight. When the security officer stepped in, hand hovering near her belt, my pulse spiked. This wasn't just a denial anymore. This was escalation. I was one wrong word away from being dragged off a plane, treated like a criminal for daring to sit where I had paid to sit. The cabin felt smaller, hotter, every second suffocating. Phones were raised higher. I could hear the click of cameras, the faint buzz of video uploads going live. My humiliation was no longer private, it was being broadcast. And maybe that was the only justice in the moment. If they were going to treat me like dirt, the world would see it. But inside me, the fury refused to quiet. My heart pounded in my ears, each beat a drum of injustice. I wanted to shout, "How dare you? How dare you strip me of my right, erase my name from your system, reduce me to nothing because I don't fit your polished image of first class?" Instead, I sat, stiff, every muscle wound tight, my breath sharp and shallow. The anger didn't leave me, it vibrated through me, a storm contained only by will. Tension laced every inch of the air around me. I wasn't just fighting for a seat. I was fighting against years of being told I wasn't enough. against every door that had been shut in my face when I was younger, against every sly smirk, every dismissal, every time someone decided I didn't belong before I even spoke. And now, here I was again, back in that moment, except this time, the stakes were higher. They thought they could bury me under their authority, their false smiles, their cheap power plays. They thought I would fold, but my fury made one thing crystal clear. I would not move, not from that seat, not from my truth. If they wanted to take me down, they would have to do it in front of every single witness, every single camera, every single eye in that cabin. Because I wasn't just angry. I was ready. I've carried many heavy things in my life: rejection letters, failed deals, late nights when I wondered if I'd ever make it. But nothing felt quite as crushing as the humiliation of that moment. Standing there in front of strangers, ticket torn to shreds, treated like an imposter, I felt stripped bare. It wasn't just that they doubted me. Doubt I could have handled. It was the way they dismissed me with smirks, the way they mocked my clothes, the way they laughed about fake cards and printed tickets at home. Every word chipped away at me until I wasn't Marcus Carter, CEO, shareholder, builder of an airline. I was just that man in jeans, unworthy of a seat I had paid for. The shame clung to me like sweat. My face burned, but not with anger this time, with exposure. They were tearing me down, and they wanted an audience. Nicole's voice rose louder, almost proud as she called me a liar. Brian's chuckle behind her back sounded like nails against a chalkboard. The captain didn't even hesitate. He backed them without once looking at the evidence in my hand. And then came the worst part, the Bennett couple sliding into my seat like I had never existed. Watching them settle into the cushion, sipping wine, their eyes barely grazing me before dismissing me entirely, it hollowed me out. It was as if I had been erased. A ghost. Not even worth acknowledgement. I sat there, feeling every stare in the cabin. Some were sympathetic, I knew. I caught the eyes of a woman filming on her phone. She whispered, "This is discrimination." But even her support didn't wash away the sting. Because for every passenger who cared, there were others who looked at me with the same quiet skepticism. Maybe he really doesn't belong. Maybe they're right. That thought twisted the knife. I wanted to speak. I wanted to shout my name, to reveal the truth of who I was. But shame glued my tongue to the roof of my mouth. To admit it then would have felt like begging. Respect me, because I'm important. And wasn't that the cruelest irony? That I had to be someone, have something, in order to be treated like a person? The humiliation seeped deeper the longer I sat. I thought back to my 20s, to the first time an airline recruiter told me I wasn't the image we're looking for. I remembered the sting of rejection, the silent ride home, the way my mother tried to comfort me but couldn't touch the shame I felt. And here it was again, full circle, decades later, on an airline I partly owned. I shifted in my seat, my hands trembling as I tried to keep them still. Every laugh from the crew echoed like thunder in my ears. Every second I stayed, I felt smaller, shrinking into the version of myself they had decided I was. Nobody. And yet, the worst humiliation wasn't in their words. It was in my silence. Sitting there, unable to rise, unable to fight back without exposing who I was, I felt trapped in a body that suddenly seemed powerless. For all my wealth, all my authority, I couldn't stop them from tearing up a simple ticket and declaring I didn't belong. That shame was suffocating. I wanted to disappear, to escape the cabin entirely, to leave the stares, the whispers, the eyes recording my every humiliation for the world to see. But I couldn't. My body stayed rooted, heavy with defeat. And in that stillness, I realized something painful. This was what others had felt. All those passengers who had written letters, filed complaints, told stories of being downgraded or ignored. This suffocating shame, this wordless humiliation, that was their truth. And now it was mine. The cabin around me blurred. I could hear the captain's voice, Nicole's mocking laugh, Brian's quiet snicker, but it all felt distant, muffled. What cut through clearly was the shame, raw and relentless, wrapping around my chest like a vice. In that moment, I wasn't a leader. I wasn't a fighter. I wasn't even Marcus Carter. I was just a man, sitting in the middle of a crowd, drowning in humiliation. Something shifted in me when I heard Mia's trembling voice break through the noise. I saw his ticket scan green. It was valid. Sevens. For a moment, the shame that had weighed me down lifted, like a door cracking open to let in light. She was just a trainee, a young woman told to stay silent, yet she stood up and spoke. That spark, it ignited something in me I hadn't felt since the first days of building this company. Strength. I sat straighter. The anger, the humiliation, the helplessness, they hadn't disappeared, but they hardened into something sharper, steadier. Resolve. Nicole snapped at Mia to stay out of this, her voice cutting, desperate to reassert control. But her words rang hollow now. I looked around and saw passengers shifting in their seats, phones raised higher, eyes sharpening with suspicion. The tide was turning, and I could feel it. When the captain gave his final warning, trying to cloak bias behind FAA guidelines, I realized I was done playing along. I was done sitting quietly, hoping reason would break through their prejudice. Reason hadn't worked. Evidence hadn't worked. Respect hadn't worked. What was left was strength, the kind you show when you know you have nothing to lose but your dignity. I stood. Not angrily, not recklessly. I stood the way you plant your feet before a storm. Calm, immovable, unshakable. "You're making a mistake," I said, my voice low but carrying through the cabin. Nicole rolled her eyes. "You're nobody. Economy's that way." Sevens. That word, nobody, lit a fuse. I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "You have no idea who I am." Sevens. The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was anticipation. The passengers were waiting, watching, sensing something was about to crack wide open. And in that stillness, I felt powerful again, not because of my title, not because of my wealth, but because I finally understood. They couldn't take away what I refused to give. My presence, my truth, my right to that seat. I wasn't surrendering any of it. The security officer stepped closer, her hand brushing her radio. I didn't flinch. I looked her in the eye and said, "You put your hands on me. You'll answer to a boardroom, not a holding cell." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Strength doesn't shout. It resonates. And I could see the hesitation ripple across her face. Behind her, Emma raised her phone again. "The internet's watching," she declared. Michael added, "This is going to blow up." And in their voices, I heard solidarity. I wasn't alone anymore. I turned back to Nicole, to Brian, to Daniel. "You ripped up my ticket. You erased my name. You mocked me. You did all of this for optics. But optics won't save you now." 7S. Nicole faltered. Brian shifted uneasily. Even the captain's rigid posture began to crack. I felt the power balance shifting, tilting in real time. What had started as their stage, their performance of authority, was unraveling. and I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the anchor holding firm while their facade crumbled. When I pulled out my phone and spoke into my AirPods, "Rachel, send everything to the board. Tell them it's time." The look on Nicole's face told me she finally understood. This wasn't going away. For the first time since stepping onto that plane, I felt my spine lengthen, my chest open. I wasn't bowing my head. I wasn't shrinking into shame. I was standing, strong, steady, unapologetic. This wasn't just about one seat anymore. It wasn't even about me. It was about every person who had ever been told they didn't belong because of how they looked. It was about rewriting the script right there in that cabin, with phones recording, witnesses watching, truth flooding into the open. And as I stood, I felt the shame burn away, replaced by something harder, brighter. Strength. I wasn't just fighting for my seat. I was fighting for the soul of my airline. And this time, I wasn't backing down. I had reached my limit. Up until then, I had tried patience. I had tried calm. I had given them every chance to correct their mistake, to look at the evidence right in front of them. But when Nicole smirked and Brian chuckled again, when Daniel repeated the same hollow warning wrapped in policy and guidelines, the dam inside me broke. I was furious. Furious in a way that didn't make me shout or lose control, but in a way that made every word sharpen into a blade. "You think this is policy?" I said, my voice steady but vibrating with heat. "Policy isn't tearing up a valid ticket. Policy isn't deleting a name from the system. Policy isn't mocking a customer because of their clothes. What you're doing isn't policy. It's prejudice." 7S. Nicole's face flushed, but she crossed her arms as if daring me to say more. Brian looked away, but the damage was already done. The passengers around me stirred, murmuring, nodding. They heard me. I turned to the captain. "And you're the highest authority on this plane, and instead of demanding facts, you backed their lies. You think that's leadership? It's cowardice." 7s. The words came out with a force I didn't plan, but I didn't hold them back. For too long, people like them had hidden behind uniforms and authority, confident their word would always outweigh the truth. Not this time. Not with half the cabin filming, not with a trainee holding recordings, not with the world already watching through hashtags and live streams. The anger in me wasn't just mine. It carried the weight of every passenger who had ever been humiliated, every voice ignored, every complaint buried. I wasn't just angry for myself, I was angry for all of them. I could see it in Nicole's eyes now. Doubt, fear, cracks in her arrogance. She tried to laugh it off. "No one's going to believe you," she sneered. That was the last straw. I stepped forward, closing the space between us, not aggressively but with purpose, my shoulders squared, my gaze locked. "They already do," I said. "Look around. Every phone here has you on video. Every passenger has seen what you did. And every second you stand there smirking, you bury yourself deeper." 7s. The tension in the cabin was electric. My pulse hammered, my chest burned with fire, but for the first time, I didn't feel cornered. I felt unchained. My fury wasn't a weakness, it was power. I raised my voice so every ear could hear. You saw a man in jeans and decided he didn't belong in first class. You decided wealth has a look, dignity has a look, respect has a look. Well, let me tell you something. No uniform, no title, no smirk will ever decide who belongs. Not on my watch. Not in my company. 7S. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Nicole tried to fire back, but her voice cracked. Brian shifted nervously, avoiding eye contact. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. And I knew. I had them. My fury had cut through their shield of false authority, leaving them exposed. I turned slowly, sweeping my eyes across the cabin. I'm not leaving this seat. I'm not bowing my head. And if they try to drag me out, you'll all see exactly who they are and what this airline has become under their watch. 7S. The passengers erupted, not with cheers, not yet, but with voices rising in agreement. He's right. This is wrong. We saw everything. Their words fueled me, strengthened me, made my anger something larger than myself. I looked back at Nicole, my voice dropping lower but sharper. You thought you could erase me, but I'm still here. And every second you keep pushing, you make me stronger. Sevens, she faltered. The arrogance was gone now, replaced by panic. And I stood taller than ever, fury blazing in my chest, unafraid, unstoppable. I wasn't just fighting for my seat anymore. I was tearing down their illusion of control. And in that moment, my anger became something more than rage. It became justice waiting to be delivered. When the adrenaline faded, regret hit me like a punch to the gut. I had stood tall. I had fought. I had unleashed the fury that burned inside me. But as the shouting quieted, as the passengers' voices softened back into murmurs, a hollow ache spread through my chest. I wasn't second-guessing my right to fight back. That was never in question. What haunted me was how deeply I had let their actions reopen wounds I thought had healed long ago. I found myself staring at the shredded boarding pass on the floor, the little pieces scattered like ash. That was me, wasn't it? Shredded once before, years ago, when I was turned down for a job because I wasn't the image they wanted. Shredded again now, by people who were supposed to represent my company. And for a brief moment, I wondered if I had failed, not as a passenger, not even as a CEO, but as a man who promised himself he'd change the system he now watched fall apart in front of him. The regret gnawed at me. I regretted trusting that calm observation would be enough. I regretted not speaking sooner, not slamming down the truth before they could strip me bare. I regretted the silence I had carried for too many minutes while they mocked me openly. Silence had been my shield, but it also became my cage. I thought of Mia, the young trainee who had risked everything to speak up. She had no power, no authority, no safety net. Yet she raised her voice when I kept mine measured, and that hurt. Because I should have been the shield for her, not the other way around. As I sat there, chest heavy, I couldn't escape the loneliness that crept in alongside regret. I was surrounded by people, by cameras, by whispers of support, but inside, I felt isolated. No title, no wealth, no ownership stake could shield me from the raw truth. For a time, they had stripped me of my humanity, and I had let it sting deeper than I wanted to admit. I regretted letting their lies make me doubt, even for a heartbeat, that I belonged. The faces of passengers blurred as my thoughts spiraled. How many others had walked away from flights with this same emptiness? How many had swallowed humiliation, too tired or too powerless to resist? I had the platform, the influence, the tools to fight, and still, I had nearly folded under the weight of shame. That realization cut me worse than any insult Nicole or Brian had thrown my way. I clenched my fists against my knees, trying to breathe, trying to steady myself. My regret wasn't weakness. It was a reminder. A reminder that I couldn't allow this moment to be just about my anger or even my seat. If all I did was win this argument, then I would have failed everyone else who had endured this in silence. I hated that it took humiliation to remind me why I had to act. I hated that I had to feel that crushing shame all over again just to find clarity. But regret has a way of burning lessons into your skin, and this one scorched deep. Silence and patience alone could not dismantle a culture that thrived on appearances. Looking at Mia, at Emma, at the passengers who dared to stand, I felt the sharpest regret of all that they had to carry this burden with me. They shouldn't have had to. My people shouldn't have been forced into choosing between silence and defiance. That was on me. I pressed my palms together, bowed my head for a breath, and let the regret settle, not as poison, but as fuel. I couldn't erase the humiliation I'd felt. I couldn't rewind the moment when I sat there, powerless and ashamed. But I could own the regret, carry it, and make sure it meant something. That was my responsibility, my duty. And as heavy as the regret was, I swore I would never let it go to waste. When I finally spoke my name aloud, the air in the cabin shifted. I am Marcus Carter, CEO and shareholder of Horizon Airlines. 7S. For a moment, silence blanketed everything. The buzzing phones, the murmurs, even the captain's clipped tone, it all evaporated into stunned stillness. Faces that had carried doubt, suspicion, or smugness turned wide-eyed, jaws slack. And in that moment, I felt something rise in me, something that had been buried beneath humiliation and anger. Pride. Not the shallow pride of proving them wrong, but the deeper pride of finally standing in the fullness of who I am, unashamed. For too long, they had looked at me and seen less. Less than a customer. Less than a man. Less than worthy of dignity. But when the truth came out, when the board's voice echoed through my phone confirming everything I had said, I stood taller. Not because I needed their validation, but because I had reclaimed what they tried to strip from me. I looked around the cabin, at the passengers who had raised their voices, at Mia with her trembling courage, at Emma with her phone still lifted high, at Michael nodding firmly beside her. Their eyes met mine, and I saw something new reflected back. Respect. Recognition. I had walked onto that plane in jeans and a t-shirt, wanting to be invisible, to blend in. And they tried to turn that invisibility into erasure. But now, no one could look past me. Not because of my title, not because of my wealth, but because I had stood my ground. Because I refused to move when every force around me tried to push me aside. The pride wasn't in my name, it was in my refusal to let them take my dignity. As Nicole stammered excuses, as Brian shifted nervously, as Daniel's face paled, I didn't feel the need to shout anymore. I didn't need to. The truth was louder than anything they could say. Their downfall wasn't my victory. It was justice correcting itself in real time. And as passengers clapped, softly at first, then stronger, I felt a wave of recognition that went deeper than applause. It was an acknowledgement not just of me, but of every person who had been told, "You don't belong," and chose to resist. I was standing, but I wasn't standing alone. For the first time in that long, suffocating hour, I felt at peace. Because being recognized wasn't about power. It wasn't about reminding them I owned part of the company. It was about reminding myself, and everyone watching, that self-worth doesn't vanish just because others refuse to see it. I remembered the boy I once was, 25 years old, rejected from a job because I wasn't the image they wanted. I wished he could see me now. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, but the man who faced that same prejudice years later and refused to bow to it. The man who stood in front of a cabin full of strangers and reminded them, "I belong." That realization filled me with a quiet pride that no smirk, no insult, no torn ticket could ever touch again. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't erased. I was seen, heard, and most importantly, I was recognized. And in that recognition, I rediscovered my own respect. That was the word echoing in my head as I watched them lower their eyes, one by one. Nicole, who once smirked at me like I was a fraud, now sat pale and trembling, unable to meet my gaze. Brian, who mocked me with easy laughter, pressed himself against the galley wall, silence choking him. Even Captain Daniel, once so sure of his authority, looked at me with the stiff posture of a man who knew his command had slipped away. And for the first time that day, I felt the weight shift completely, not just in authority, but in respect. The passengers weren't clapping wildly. They weren't cheering like it was a performance. No, their silence carried something far more powerful. Acknowledgement. They looked at me not as a man in jeans, not as an imposter, but as someone who had faced injustice and refused to be erased. Their eyes told me what words couldn't. They respected me. It was a respect that hadn't been given easily. I had been stripped down, humiliated, pushed to the edge. I had felt shame and rage twist inside me like knives. But because I endured, because I stood my ground, respect came back to me, stronger, undeniable. When the board's voice rang over my phone, when the order of termination came down, I saw it clearly. Authority doesn't command respect. Integrity does. Titles can intimidate, wealth can impress, but only truth earns recognition. And that's what the cabin gave me in that moment. Truthful recognition. Mia stepped closer, her eyes shining with something more than admiration. She didn't just see me as a CEO now. She saw me as someone who had validated her courage, someone who proved that speaking up matters. She whispered, "Thank you." And for a brief moment, I realized the respect went both ways. I respected her for risking everything. She respected me for standing with her. That bond meant more than any applause. I turned toward the passengers. "I want to thank you," I said, my voice carrying steady. "Not for siding with me, but for standing up for what's right, for refusing to sit silent." 7S. The cabin erupted in nods, murmurs of agreement, and a wave of something I could only describe as collective dignity. They respected me, yes, but more importantly, they respected themselves for not letting injustice pass quietly by. For years, I had thought respect came with success, with titles, with wealth, with ownership. But sitting there in seat 2A, jeans creased at the knee, I realized the truth. Respect is born when you hold the line, even when everything in the room tries to shove you backward. And in that moment, I felt taller than I ever had in any boardroom. Because boardrooms give you power. But this gave me something no contract or title ever could. The respect of ordinary people who saw me stripped bare and still standing. When the replacement crew arrived and the terminated staff filed out, heads down, the applause finally rose. It wasn't thunderous, it was grounded, steady, real. Each clap struck like affirmation. Respect. 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 I sat back in my rightful seat, 2A, and looked out at the cabin that had turned from a place of humiliation into a place of vindication. I no longer felt invisible. I no longer felt erased. I felt recognized, validated, and above all, respected. And in that recognition, I knew. This was the moment that would change not only Horizon Airlines, but me. Because respect earned in the face of injustice is the kind that lasts forever. When the applause settled into a calm hum across the cabin, a wave of peace washed over me. Not the brittle calm that comes after you've forced a fight to end, but the deep serenity that only comes when justice finally breathes free. I leaned back into seat 2A, my seat, and for the first time since boarding, I let myself exhale fully. The leather cushions didn't just feel soft, they felt earned. Every insult, every doubt, every mocking glance, they no longer weighed me down. They had burned away, leaving behind something lighter, something almost joyful. I looked around and saw faces softened, no longer twisted in suspicion or hostility. Emma gave me a small smile, her phone still in her lap, recording off. Michael raised his cup of water slightly in a quiet toast. Even strangers I hadn't spoken to nodded, their eyes warm. I had entered this plane invisible. Now I sat visible, not for my title, but for my resolve. The joy wasn't in winning. It was in the simple, human recognition that I belonged, that truth had been defended. And that recognition filled me with a serenity I hadn't felt in years. I glanced toward Mia. She stood straighter now, wings pinned freshly to her chest, cheeks still flushed with disbelief at her sudden promotion. Our eyes met, and I couldn't help but smile. She looked away shyly, but not before I caught the glimmer in her eyes, a glimmer of hope. That gave me joy, too, because it meant my fight had opened a door for someone else. And then there was Linda, hovering near the galley, subdued but not broken. She had made her mistakes, but she had also stepped back when it mattered most. I gave her a small nod. She nodded back, her face carrying the quiet weight of someone determined to learn. Seeing that gave me a sense of peace. Redemption wasn't just mine, it was theirs to find too. The tension that once strangled the cabin had dissolved. Instead, the air felt lighter, freer, almost like a collective sigh after holding breath too long. Passengers chatted softly, some smiling, some scrolling through their phones with relief that the worst had passed. Children giggled a few rows back, their laughter piercing through what had once been suffocating silence. And inside me, a calm happiness bloomed. I thought of the boy I used to be, sitting in the back row of planes, staring out windows and dreaming of a day when I might belong in the front. That boy had carried shame, doubt, rejection. But here I was, not just sitting in 2A, but claiming it without apology. That memory didn't sting anymore. It soothed me, like a reminder of how far I'd come. The serenity didn't erase the anger I had felt, or the humiliation, but it transformed them. They weren't weights anymore. They were stepping stones. They had led me here, to this very moment of calm joy. As the new captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and respectful, thanking passengers for their patience and acknowledging me directly, I closed my eyes and smiled. Not a triumphant smile, not a smug one, just the soft, quiet smile of someone who knows balance has been restored. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was fighting. I didn't feel like I was proving anything. I felt free. Free from the need to explain myself. Free from the sting of invisibility. Free to simply exist, respected, seen, whole. And in that freedom, joy grew. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was calm, steady, and lasting. As the engines roared and the plane lifted off the runway, I gazed out at the darkening sky. City lights blurred beneath us. Stars waited above. The world outside was vast, quiet, and infinite. And within me, it matched perfectly. Vast, quiet, infinite peace. For once, I wasn't thinking about the fight, the fallout, or even the headlines waiting outside. I was simply here, in this moment, joyful and serene. And it was enough. As the plane settled into the sky, I knew the battle inside that cabin was only the beginning. What mattered most wasn't the humiliation I endured or even the justice I reclaimed. It was what came next. Reform. For years, Horizon Airlines had spoken the language of excellence while quietly allowing bias to fester in its ranks. I had seen hints, I had read reports, but I had never witnessed the rot this clearly, this personally. And now that I had, I couldn't ignore it. I wouldn't. I looked down the aisle, at the passengers who had stood for me, at Mia wearing her new wings with pride, at Linda quietly reflecting on the choice she almost made. This wasn't just about punishing a few bad actors. It was about reshaping the very culture that had enabled them. In that moment, I made a vow. Horizon would change from the ground up. No more hollow promises. No more polished PR statements. Real change, structural, enforceable, undeniable, would begin tonight. Reform wasn't just an obligation, it was my responsibility. I thought back to the moment Nicole tore my boarding pass, to the smirk on her face, to the captain's casual dismissal. That wasn't just their failure, it was mine too. My airline, my leadership, my culture had let this happen. If I wanted respect to mean something, I had to rebuild the house from its foundation. I reached for my phone and spoke into my AirPods, Rachel still on the line. Tell the board this isn't about one flight. It's about every base, every cabin, every uniform. We're going to audit everything. Logs, seating, complaints. Every bias buried under policy ends now. 7S. Rachel's voice came back steady, resolute. Already in motion. Compliance is drafting new frameworks. Training, oversight, reporting channels direct to the board. 7S. Her words steadied me, but it was more than policy I wanted. It was transformation. I wanted Mia's courage to become the standard, not the exception. I wanted every passenger to know they belonged, whether in seat 2A or 32F. I wanted Horizon to be known not for luxury alone, but for integrity. And I meant every word. Looking around that cabin, I realized this flight would become a story far bigger than me. The world was already watching, hashtags trending, videos soaring past 1 million views, but none of that mattered if it ended there. What mattered was action, reform. So I stood again, steady in the aisle, and spoke clearly to the passengers. This isn't just about tonight. It's about tomorrow. What you've witnessed will change this airline, and I want you to hold me accountable for it. 7s. The cabin grew quiet, not with fear but with trust. People nodded. Some even smiled. In their eyes, I saw something stronger than relief. I saw belief. Belief that this time, things really would change. That belief gave me strength. It reminded me that leadership isn't about hiding when things get ugly. It's about standing in the ugliness and choosing to build something better from it. As the engines hummed and the night sky stretched wide outside my window, I felt the fire of reform burning inside me. Strong, relentless, unstoppable. This wasn't about saving face. It wasn't about protecting reputation. It was about rebuilding a company so no one else would have to endure what I had. The boy I once was, the one told he didn't fit the image, deserved that. Every passenger who had been erased, downgraded, humiliated deserved that. Mia deserved that. And I would see it through. In that cabin, thousands of feet above the ground, I claimed not just my seat, but my responsibility. Respect had been restored, but reform would secure it for the future. And I swore, with all the strength in me, that Horizon Airlines would never be the same again.